Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to this week's broadcast. I got some stories for you. Just give me 1 second here. I want to make an adjustment and then put this up here. For those of you who are new to the channel, stumbling on this video, learning about what this channel does, I welcome you. I invite you to go to thedissenter.org for my regular writing and the work that is done on whistleblowers, government secrecy, as well as press freedom related issues. And usually this shows an opportunity to talk about the stuff that I didn't get a chance to write about in the past week and to engage with people who follow the channel, but also follow my work. If you have anything you'd like me to discuss or respond to, let me know in the chat while the show is going. I always appreciate engaging with people who watch the show. And you know who you are. There are people out there that I'm very familiar with who are really good to have around while I'm covering these stories. So, with that, I invite you to subscribe. If you would like to become a supporter of this work, you can pay for the newsletter, and then also you can support the independent journalism that I do by becoming a member of the channel. This broadcast will archive after I finish, and then after that, it's available to people who are members of the channel, and I might pull out a clip and share it with everyone, or I might not. It's a holiday weekend, and maybe I don't feel like it. So, but first, the stories that I have for you this week, we're going to go through the complicity that the U.S. government has had in the massacres carried out by Saudi Arabia's border patrol against Ethiopian migrants in particular. And we'll also discuss the plans by the U.S. military's plans, or the Pentagon's plans, for developing a drone army that can match drone for drone or aircraft to aircraft, whatever China is flying around its mainland. And then we'll get into the declassification of some files on the Chile coup from 1973 and their push to release those files, why they're important, but also just, to reflect on it, because it's been about 50 years. In fact, on September 11th, they'll be marking 50 years since the U.S. played a role in the assassination of their leader, Salvador Allende. And so I welcome you here. I'm sure some of you will come in mid-broadcast, and I'll get to the first story here, present that story for you. Let's go here. Just pulling this up. Like I said, the first story we'll discuss here is the Saudi Arabian border patrol that has been executing people quite brutally. And we find out that the U.S. government has known about it. And of course they have. And of course they are looking the other way, because the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. government is more important than whatever's happening to these people who are taking a very dangerous route, trying to get in from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. And so it says in the New York Times that the United States was told last year that Saudi security forces were shooting, shelling, and abusing groups of migrants, but chose not to raise the issue publicly. And so what sparks this acknowledgement that there has been complicity on the part of the U.S. government is a report done by Human Rights Watch, and it made news last week. And they document in very vivid detail these mass killings that are taking place. And so let me just get into some of that here. The report details these large group crossings and deaths that have been taking place. And there's even a video that was put together. I might play a little bit of it, but also there's not really a lot of incentive to include that in your YouTube video because YouTube actually discourages showing crimes against humanity in your video because I guess it doesn't help them sell advertising. Anyways, Human Rights Watch interviewed 23 people who attempted to cross into Saudi Arabia as part of large groups that came under fire from explosive weapons. This included one person who watched another group come under fire the day before he attempted to cross, giving a total of 24 large group incidents. It says that 3,442 people were estimated to have taken part in large crossings. They talked to 10 interviewees. They believe that there have been 11 attempted crossings with a total of 1,278 migrants. They had seen killed or estimated or at least 655 deaths. So, in this kind of convoluted way, Human Rights Watch is getting to the fact that there have been many, many deaths as a result of these dangerous crossings. And then one of these incidents, a survivor explained that from his group of 170 people, quote, I know 90 people were killed because some returned to that place to pick up the dead bodies. They counted around 90 dead bodies. For 9 additional attempted large group crossings involving an estimated 1,630 people, interviewees saw people dying around them, but were often too busy fleeing or too traumatized to give an estimate of the number of deaths, and instead said how many people returned to the camps. In these 9 cases, out of 1,630 migrants, interviewees recounted that 281 people had survived. For example, one interviewee explained, quote, from 150, only 7 people survived that day. There were remains of people everywhere, scattered everywhere. That's end of the quote. Another interviewee went to the Saudi border to collect the body of a girl from his village and said, quote, her body was piled up on top of 20 bodies, end quote. The same individual explained that it is really impossible to count the number. It is beyond the imagination. People are going in different groups day to day. The dead bodies are there. This is a quote. And then Human Rights Watch adds, for the remaining 4 large group crossings that came under fire from heavy weapons, interviewees were not able to estimate the number of dead or known survivors. And so this means that these border patrol from Saudi Arabia killed hundreds, possibly thousands of Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers. And so we had this brutality unfolding. The United Nations has known somewhat about it, but as you go through the article that is in the New York Times, you get a very bleak picture of the dynamic here because the United States has, well, let's just put it this way. They've taken the DeSantis view when it comes to border policy.
Yeah, of course you use deadly force. I mean, how would you let somebody just break into your house and do you harm? No. And I could tell you in Texas, they wouldn't do that. Try that in Texas. Why is our country any different? If you drop a couple of these cartel operatives trying to do that, you're not gonna have to worry about that anymore. They will not mess. They're only messing with it because they know they can get away with it.
And I should be clear here. They're apologizing or allowing Saudi Arabia to hold the DeSantis view. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, is taking the DeSantis approach and mowing down migrants as they cross the border. And that is the approach that DeSantis and a very vocal faction of the Republican Party would like for border policy. that you just open fire as they are crossing the border. And so in response to that aggression, the United States is putting a potential relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia before speaking out against these human rights atrocities. And they personally would like to, I suppose, be silent on human rights so that they can get cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's something, which of course then means that it's even more impossible for Palestinians to get any type of dignity or fairness or treatment that would help them fight their struggle against apartheid and military occupation. Makes it even harder for them to challenge that oppression. So in that, there's this shared reality that these massacres are going to continue to happen side by side with that persistent injustice. And then you have, the reality that they're not going to do any more than what you see happen in police departments throughout the country, where they decide they're going to investigate themselves. And this is what the CIA does, right? So the Saudi Border Patrol will be invited by the U.S. government to investigate itself and figure out what it's done. And perhaps, tinker with the policy just a little bit. Could you try to not be so brazen about how you mow down Black Africans as they're trying to get across? These are people who are susceptible to human trafficking. They might have survived smuggling. There's even more gruesome aspects to this in the report related to women and girls that have been raped, either by Saudi border guards, or sometimes they're raped by the Houthis on the other side of the border in Yemen. We got to remember there is this war that has been unfolding brutally, which the U.S. has supported Saudi Arabia, and it's been a kind of genocide against Yemenis. So this is an ugly situation, and you find that the United States knows exactly the moves that Saudi Arabia is taking, and they have chosen silence, and they have chosen to be as modest, and they'll express their concerns, but those are about as good as the thoughts and prayers that are given for people who are gunned down in mass shootings in the United States. So they've taken the thoughts and prayers line for Saudi Arabia. Everything that Saudi Arabia does, the next journalist that gets chopped up, they'll just have thoughts and prayers for that individual. There won't be much room for them to enforce and protect human rights because the Saudi Arabian relationship could be jeopardized. And that's the sad state of where we are when it comes to that aspect of U.S. foreign policy. And yeah, so as you say here, Songs for K, it's important we speak about our complicity in Saudi atrocities, especially because so many in Western media look the other way. And that's why it's in the show today. That's why we're talking about this report and the details in it. And, very, very shockingly, the things that we learn from people like they quote a 14-year-old, Hamdia. This is in the Human Rights Watch report. We were fired on repeatedly. I saw people killed in a way I have never imagined. I saw 30 killed people on the spot. I pushed myself under a rock and slept there. I could feel people sleeping around me. I realized what I thought were people sleeping around me were actually dead bodies. I woke up and I was alone. It's horrifying what Saudi border guards are doing. And sometimes there's actually smaller crossings. There's smaller groups, and Saudi border guards are approaching people. It's described in the report that they walk up and they'll actually ask you, which limb would you like us to shoot? People are coming to hospitals and they're having to receive amputations for gruesome wounds that they are succumbing to, that they're having happen to their bodies as a result of, we must remember, leaving these countries in the Horn of Africa that, I'm sure there are an array of examples that reflect the threats to their lives that they are trying to escape, and in trying to get to some place that they think could give them some more stability. Not to say that there aren't stable environments in that part of the African continent, but in seeking something better than what they have, seeking to escape poverty. You might not think going to Saudi Arabia you would escape poverty, but it's all relative, right? And so I think people there probably do live better, even if they have to live under the oppression of Mohammed bin Salman. So trying to get access to better jobs, trying to have some kind of way that they could send money back to their families. It's all about trying to get to something better than where you are. I'm not going to Saudi Arabia, but I live in the United States. But these people are trying to find something better, and in doing so, they are being massacred. And and we have to talk about what Saudi Arabia is doing here. We absolutely do. So let me go on to this next thing that I have to discuss, which is Kathleen Hicks, the Deputy Defense Secretary. She was speaking at a conference, speaking at a tech conference that was attended by defense executives. And this conference is hosted by the National Defense Industrial Association, had a role to play in putting this together. And I just put this on here to give you a sense of who they are, that they are involved in working with the military, government, industry, and academic members, or colleges or universities. This is a military industrial complex group. It goes all the way back to the 1940s. All the way back to the 1940s. And my favorite part of their description, not a lobbying firm, not a lobby firm. They really would like you to keep that clear. They are educational. They're just there to inform people about national security and defense threats that just don't happen to be lucrative opportunities for people to make hundreds of millions of dollars on government contracts. But they're not a lobbying firm, and they're not there. So I love that. Don't get confused. And even though they were there to do this, whatever this was, and it was all about emerging technologies for defense, for military, for war making. It actually says in the subheading, delivering new capabilities to the warfighter at speed and scale. It's about autonomous weapon systems, or autonomous systems in general. And it's all about probably incorporating artificial intelligence. And defense executives were in attendance. So, they're not lobbying, but all those people there are there to get some kind of an outcome that would enrich their companies. They're there displaying their tech. They're showing off their products. And so in this room, you had Kathleen Hicks, and there's a story I encourage you to go read to get some more details. It's over at Responsible Statecraft. Kelly Vallejos wrote it. U.S. military promises hellscape of drone swarming in future China war. And this was announced. I'm going to play some of what Kathleen Hicks had to say to those who were in attendance, there to cheer this initiative that is being revealed. But it's much like the approach that has been taken in Ukraine, to go out and provide them with drone tech as a way to counter the Russian military forces. And it's kind of been treated a bit like a panacea. It doesn't really make it that much easier for them to beat back advanced military force. But so I imagine like the drones are probably technology that we would give to Taiwan as well, to try and help it. And there are other scenarios that I could see in my head, but let's get to this speech that was given. The speech was given earlier in the week. Was at this conference on August 28th. And I've got it up at the part where she reveals this program and the name of it and what it's going to be. And so I'll put that out here for you to watch. And I'll have commentary as it plays related to what this defense secretary is saying. Pentagon secretary.
Alchemic moments when all the parts collide, that's when game-changing innovation really happens. And right now is one of those moments. Today, we're making another big bet, the latest piece of our comprehensive warfighting-centric approach to innovation. It's called the Replicator Initiative, and I want to tell you a bit about it. Replicator is meant to help us overcome the PRC's biggest advantage, which is mass. More ships, more missiles, more people. Before Russia invaded Ukraine again in February, they seemed to have that advantage too. But historically, even when we've mobilized our economy and manufacturing base, rarely have America's war-winning strategies relied solely on matching an adversary ship for ship or shot for shot. After all, we don't use our people as cannon fodder like some competitors do.
No, you just send proxy forces into battle and let them be the cannon fodder, because no politician in Congress wants to face the families of U.S. soldiers who recognize that they were just sent to fight a rich man's war, or a war on behalf of the military-industrial complex, war that was designed to enrich those corporations. You know which ones we're talking about, like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, those companies that are best suited to profit. Raytheon, hell, the Pentagon chief is Lloyd Austin. He was on one of the boards for Raytheon. So he leaves Raytheon and he goes to the Pentagon and he runs it under President Joe Biden. So yeah, there's no risk of U.S. military becoming cannon fodder, because we find proxy forces that can be deployed instead. So yes, the secretary, the deputy defense secretary, as she refers to herself, is correct.
Instead, we outmatch adversaries by outthinking, outstrategizing, and outmaneuvering them. We augment manufacturing and mobilization with our real comparative advantage, which is the innovation and spirit of our people. And so, if the operational challenge we must tackle is one of countering mass, we will do so not only through existing approaches and systems, those remain important, but we already know how to build and use today's technology. This is about mastering the technology of tomorrow. To stay ahead, we're going to create a new state-of-the-art, just as America has before, leveraging attritable autonomous systems in all domains.
Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. You should just hear the cash register ringing up, the bills being sent to the Pentagon.
Substantially shorter lead times. We'll counter the PLA's mass with mass of our own, but ours will be harder to plan for, harder to hit, harder to beat. With smart people, smart concepts, and smart technology, our military will be more nimble, with uplift and urgency from the commercial sector. We've all seen in Ukraine how emerging tech developed by commercial...
Anything you can do, I can do better. It's the policy of the U.S. Defense Department versus China. And it's just going to get to be a tit for tat. Now, but, the difference, though, between the Chinese government and the U.S. government is that we are going to be going to their mainland and surrounding them with these drones that we claim are going to match their fleet, drone for drone, or I guess we're going to have aircraft match for aircraft, or whatever robotics technology they're employing. We're going to keep pace with that as well. And so that fleet that will be airborne, and as that article described, will create a kind of hellscape. So you're going to have drones just dominating the airspace in and around China and around the Asia Pacific surrounding. And if you don't think that's provocative, I mean, just do the easy and tired old exercise of asking yourself how you'd feel if the Chinese decided to park all of this hardware and equipment off the shores of California or near Hawaii, or maybe they want to send it up to Alaska. Or what if they just decide they're going to go around the world and come and park a big fleet nearby Florida? Yeah, let's see how people down there feel when the Chinese have a fleet boxing in and trying to counter the United States in the southeast. I'm sure that will go over well. So this event, this is a recipe for conflict. Maybe that's the intention. The idea being that these people would be able to make money off of whatever comes. It's been quite incredible to watch the way in which people have been seemingly egging on a kind of escalation between China and U.S., or the U.S. against China, wanting to see something happen dramatically to defend Taiwan, to do what could be done to I suppose, ensure that it's independent, but to dangerously put the United States in a position where we were responsible for making sure it could exist without China telling it what to do or dictating its future, then taking on those risks. I mean, doing it because we want to lay some kind of a trap or create a kind of quagmire for China, much like we wanted to do that with Ukraine against Russia. And this seems to be the choice of the United States in maintaining its unipolar world, which is a fiction. You can't do it. And we're seeing losses pile up in the African continent for many of these Western powers, including the United States. Of course, the U.S. is not really, not one that has as much of a colonial history directly, although the slave trade, but usually it's France, it's Belgium, it's the UK, it's those countries that had actually successfully run colonial governments in the continent. Now they're losing them, and like France is losing their influence dramatically, and it's quite a show of anti-colonial resistance. And that includes over the last year, I think in Gabon, we just had a coup. And so this whole thing of the U.S. is going to dominate and control the globe is a fiction slipping away. But this is, I think, a hallmark of where we are in this stage of U.S. empire, that there's a lot of denial among people about what kind of authority the United States still has as a country, as a global power. And so there you see it in putting forward this project, the replicator, as she puts forward. I'll go to the next story here. The next story here involves Chile and the coup that took place in 1973. In 1973, and there's been a push for the disclosure of these files. It's not that we don't know anything about what happened then, but there's been a universe of files that the CIA has refused to release that would even more vividly reflect the knowledge that the agency and President Nixon, their Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, and others, and what they knew at the time when the violent coup overthrew Salvador Allende. He was assassinated. So when that took place and democracy was overthrown and he was a socialist, and when they were fighting this country, waging this you have these files now finally that have been released because of some pressure, believe it or not, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think Greg Cesar was also involved. He's a Democratic representative. There was a delegation that went to Chile and met with the president, and his name is Gabriel Boric. And their Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, Gloria de la Fuente, thanked the administration for declassifying these files. 50 years after the coup d'etat, she said, and she's a diplomat, the declassification of archives of this documentation promotes the search for truth and reinforces the commitment of our countries to our democratic values. Now, what was revealed? What do we know now that, brings into focus more of what was happening that day in that coup? Well, we are able to now see, well, first of all, we're able to see side by side the secrecy. We're able to see what was behind those white boxes 7 years ago, because there were files released and they were seeking the president's daily brief from September 11th, 1973 on that day to find out what Richard Nixon knew. And they didn't get it immediately. And then here's another one. So you can see the level of secrecy that existed. And so we can tell now what exactly was being covered up. And so I'll read to you from this one file here that has Chile up at the top. It says, for the president only. It says, a number of reports have been received from Chile indicating the possibility of an early military coup attempt. And then we have a redaction, and I don't know what they're protecting, but it's been 50 years. So unrest centers in the Navy, whose personnel have been on edge about the imminent naming of a new service chief. Navy men plotting to overthrow the government now claim Army and Air Force support. Then they're quoting, or there's a thing in here of there's no evidence of a coordinated tri-service coup plan. Army generals, in fact, lately have been talking ways of building inter-service unity with the view to increasing the military's influence on the government. Should hotheads in the Navy act in the belief they will automatically receive support from the other services, they could find themselves isolated. Then these are also indications that naval officers could be planning joint anti-government actions with militant civilian opponents of the regime. The far rightist Fatherland and Freedom Movement, so we've got fascists groups, have been blocking roads and provoking clashes with the national police, adding to the tension caused by continuing strikes and opposition political moves. President Allende, and again, 50 years later, still have, I don't know what we're protecting, said he believed the armed forces will ask for his resignation if he does not change his economic and political policies. He raised the prospect of an armed confrontation between his followers and the military. Allende said his supporters do not have enough weapons to prevail in such an event, and that it would do no good to try to distribute more arms now since the military would not permit it. He concluded the only solution is a political one. Allende seemed to be trying to convince, I don't know who they're protecting, that the situation is serious and requires cautious handling, and that some tactical political retreats may be in order. He is worried about the sustained opposition pressures against him, and especially about the intentions of the military. So this is a report, a daily briefing. I think the one that I just read to you is, this is from September 8th. This is before the coup day. And then on the day of the coup, as it is happening, what we have is plans by Navy officers to trigger military action against the Allende government. There's another redaction are supported by some key Army units, and the Navy is also counting on help from the Air Force and the National Police. They say, although military officers are increasingly determined to restore political and economic order, they may still lack an effectively coordinated plan that would capitalize on the widespread civilian opposition. Socialists, leftist extremists, communists are equally determined not to compromise. They are gambling. That the military and political opposition cannot carry out moves to oust the government or even to impose restraints on it. President Allende, for his part, still hopes that temporizing will fend off a showdown. So, I know, like, at the time, the reason why they don't. This doesn't seem as much of a bombshell today because we know details, but we always have to remember that back then the U.S. was hiding its role and very, very secretive and didn't want the world to know that it was behind this violent coup. So, and as much as that was hard to keep up, they weren't willing to admit numerous details. So, and that was even though, so you go back here, you've got that Salvador Allende. So he's assassinated. That's CIA Director Richard Helms. And of course, that's Richard Nixon. And then Pinochet and Kissinger are having meetings or have a private meeting together. And this is a job well done. We want to support you, but that's all happening behind the scenes. It's not like they want to totally advertise it. And so El País earlier this year, marking the 100th birthday of Henry Kissinger, says we are, refers to a document that is out there that was also published by this National Security Archive that is featuring and is where they have many of the documents on the Chile coup. So he's meeting with, it's a private meeting in Santiago in June 1976, 3 years later. And Kissinger just straight up says, we want to help, not undermine you. We are sympathetic with what you're trying to do here. They tell General Pinochet, dictator, you did a great service to the West in overthrowing Allende. And he adds, my evaluation is that you are a victim of all left-wing groups around the world, that your greatest sin was that you overthrew a government which was going communist. That's the greatest sin, not the rounding people up in the stadium and executing them and stringing them up and torturing and all of that. The sin was that it was the communists made him do it. So that's Kissinger. And he explained, though, that, and this will have parallels to what we said at the opening when we were covering Saudi Arabia. He says that there are problems of the issue of human rights. I want you to understand my position. We want to deal in moral persuasion, not by legal sanctions. And so he mentioned that there's going to be a speech in which he would briefly refer to a report by the Organization of American States on Human Rights. It would talk about the Chile government and their atrocities or their abuses that were being uncovered or detailed or making it out to the world as a result of the Pinochet dictatorship, the regime's actions. And Henry Kissinger would pay it some lip service, just like the U.S. government pays the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia lip service. They mention the atrocities. Oh, yes, we know that's going on. We would never approve of that. And then goes about their business like they've just removed any responsibility they have to the whole situation. And that is, it seems a half century later, what we did 50 years ago is the United States government, it's still their approach. If they're going to work and associate with a country that carries out constant human rights atrocities, then there's a playbook to follow, and you don't want to alienate them. You want to keep them a partner. So you're careful about how much you talk about and the reality of what's happening to their citizens. So that brings me, I believe, to the end of the show here, talking to you, checking in. and it's good to take a moment to cover some stories from the past week. And what do we like? Why don't we go ahead and work this in here? Because you may have seen that Mitch McConnell froze up again, and he was standing there taking questions, and I think I figured out why this continues to happen, and we might be able to fix this. So I'll just have to play this here so you all can see what I saw, or I guess hear what I think Mitch McConnell. I think I know why Mitch McConnell was freezing it. So here.
I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing you.
That's okay. What are your thoughts on running for re-election?
What are my thoughts about what?
Pardon me?
Running for re-election
Yeah.
in 2026?
I would like to support a yes vote on this. It provides $823
Did you hear the question,
billion.
Senator? Running for
That's an
re-election in
increase of
2026?
$26 billion for the Department of Defense. And
All right, I'm sorry,
it
you already need a
funds
minute.
priorities submitted.
Penny.
Yeah, just say aye.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd start freezing up too if I was hearing the other person in the Senate. I was hearing their voice, Dianne Feinstein's voice in my. I think that's what's happening. I don't think he's stroking out. I think that he's getting there and he's hearing Dianne Feinstein, and that's why it becomes even more clear that the solution to all of this is for them both to just resign the Senate. So I think that has to be the way that we take care of this. And maybe when she blanks out, she's hearing Mitch McConnell's voice. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe these octogenarians that are incapable of resigning or not running for re-election, maybe they like start to hear each other in their heads as they're freezing up. I don't know. So it's just my own theory, just my own thought that there might be some kind of bond between them. They're kind of like hive mind. I mean, they are all working for the same glob of military interests and fossil fuel or foreign policy interests or different groups that are pulling them. So I think at some point they lost their independence and they all have melded together. So as they decline, they hear each other when they freeze up. That's just my theory. I'm just theorizing. So thank you for being here to watch the show. Thanks for your support of this work. And I do a movie show at the end of the week. If that's of any interest to you, I'll have some stuff to talk about tomorrow or Saturday, depending on when I get around to doing the streaming. But I had a chance to go to the Noir City Film Festival here in Chicago when it stopped. It goes to various major cities in the United States with Noir Czar, Eddie Muller, and got to see Force of Evil, which is a fantastic classic, noir classic from Abe Polanski. It's a blacklisted movie director. And so I probably talk about, getting to see some like 3 amazing top-notch noir flicks while also, maybe getting into a story from the world of cinema in the past week. If it's just giving you a little preview, I might throw in some other stuff there, but I always enjoy getting to the end of the week, having a chance to unwind on this channel by engaging with people and, some of you that come by and understand what I'm trying to do. Share your own opinions about some of this stuff, and I appreciate being able to engage with you on that. So With that, it's a holiday weekend in the U.S. If you're in the U.S., hope you get a chance to do something that allows you to relax a little bit, get a break from the grind of your daily life. If you're outside the U.S., well, you get treated better than most people in the U.S. depending on if you're in Europe or Australia. I get a lot of people who watch this show from the UK, but you're asleep by now. If I had any Australians tuning in, then you're waking up in the morning. And anyways, I hope you have a good weekend, and I will talk to you all later.